Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in every life when the rhythm of our days becomes too loud, too chaotic, too fragmented. We rush forward obeying the tyranny of calendars, chasing significance through achievements, believing that motion equals meaning. But beneath the surface, a quiet truth stirs. You have been doing too much, and the soul, that ancient, watchful presence within you, is no longer whispering. It is beginning to shout. What happens when you stop? You do not fall apart. You come together. The modern world seduces us with the illusion of progress. Every day is framed as an opportunity to achieve, to conquer, to add one more thing to the ever-growing list of accomplishments that are meant to make us feel worthy, successful, complete. We check boxes and meet deadlines, attend meetings, fulfill obligations, and in doing so, we feel a fleeting sense of control, of importance. But underneath this restless compulsion to produce, there is often something far more fragile, a fragmented self. When a person becomes consumed by doing, when motion becomes habitual and rest becomes foreign, there is a quiet internal consequence that begins to unfold. The psyche, deep, subtle, and ancient, does not function on deadlines or digital clocks. It functions on rhythms, cycles, silence, and reflection. When we ignore this, when we prioritize productivity over presence, we gradually lose contact with the center of ourselves. We become unanchored. The very identity we are so busy performing begins to lose authenticity, even coherence. This isn't merely exhaustion. It's not just burnout or fatigue. It's a deeper kind of alienation, a spiritual distance from one's own inner truth. The constant activity becomes a mask, a performance we carry out for the world while we quietly starve inside. There is a kind of existential hunger that begins to rise when we realize we have been too outward, facing for too long. We've been showing up to every event, every task, every obligation, but not to ourselves. The need to always be busy is often disguised as ambition, but in reality, it can be a sophisticated form of avoidance. We're not working ourselves to the bone because we're passionate or even driven. We're working because the silence terrifies us, because when we stop, when we finally set down all the things we think make us valuable, we are left with nothing but ourselves. And that is where the reckoning begins. That is where the truth waits. Many people sense this unconsciously. That's why slowing down can provoke anxiety, why taking a break often brings not peace, but discomfort. The moment we stop doing, our unprocessed emotions, unmet needs, forgotten dreams, and hidden wounds begin to rise. The very things we buried beneath years of effort and achievement begin to surface, and we don't know how to greet them. The sadness we never addressed, the fear we numbed with work, the longing we ignored, it all begins to appear when we are finally still enough to see it. But here lies the paradox. Though we avoid this inner confrontation, it is exactly what we need, not as a punishment, but as a pathway back to wholeness. In over-identifying with the role of the doer, the achiever, the provider, we forget that there is a part of us that exists beyond function. There is a dimension of self that is valuable not because of what it can do, but because of what it is, and we cannot access that part while running. We can only meet it when we are still, so the illusion of productivity must be broken. It must be seen for what it often is, a distraction from deeper work, not the work of tasks and outcomes, but the internal labor of facing the self, of reclaiming lost parts, of becoming whole again, because a life that is full of doing but empty of being is not truly lived. And the longer we delay this return to our inner life, the louder the symptoms of our fragmentation become: restlessness, anxiety, disconnection, even despair. These are not signs that something is wrong with us. They are signs that something is missing, something we can only find when we stop. When you finally slow down after years of constant doing, something unexpected happens. The parts of yourself that you thought were long gone begin to stir. These are not just memories or old habits, but fragments of your own psyche that have been pushed into the shadows of your awareness. They've been waiting, watching, hidden beneath layers of responsibility, performance, and survival. And when the noise of endless activity fades, when the body grows still, and the mind begins to loosen its grip, the shadow comes forward, not to harm you, but to be seen. Most people imagine the shadow as something negative, something dark and dangerous that must be suppressed or destroyed. But this is a misunderstanding born from fear. The shadow is not your enemy. It is everything within you that has been denied, rejected, or left behind. It includes the anger you were taught to suppress, the sadness you had no space to express, the desires you buried because they made others uncomfortable, but it also holds your forgotten gifts, your raw creative energy, your hidden intuition, your unmet potential. It is not just the broken parts of you. It is also the powerful ones that never had the chance to live. When you are always busy, there is no room for the shadow to appear. The pace of doing becomes a barrier, a defense mechanism against self-confrontation. You stay in control, stay on schedule, stay above the surface, but stopping disrupts that rhythm. It allows the unconscious to rise, and what rises first is often the discomfort, the shame, the grief, the inner critic, the voices you absorbed from childhood or culture that told you who you were allowed to be. It is not easy to face these things. In fact, it can be deeply unsettling, but discomfort is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is the sign that something real is finally happening. This is the beginning of integration. To integrate, the shadow does not mean to agree with everything it brings. It means to face it honestly, to hear its messages, to let its truths be known. Because within the shadow are the keys to your authenticity. There is energy there, all untamed and waiting to be reclaimed. This energy is what makes a person whole, not perfect but whole, and wholeness does not come from endless doing. It comes from courageous being, from sitting in the silence and letting all that you have ignored step forward into the light of your awareness. You may cry, you may rage, you may feel confusion or shame or guilt. These are the emotions you outran while you were chasing success or approval. Now they return to be felt and released. This is not regression. This is evolution. It is not weakness. It is strength, the kind of strength that is not loud but deep, the kind that allows you to walk through the fire of self-confrontation and emerge more honest, more grounded, more real. The kind of strength that makes you no longer afraid of yourself. In this process, something softens. You begin to understand your past not as a series of mistakes, but as a map of meaning. You see your defense mechanisms not with judgment, but with compassion. You realize how much of your life was lived in reaction to pain you never fully acknowledged, and now, slowly, that pain becomes integrated. The shadow becomes less threatening and more like an old companion, one who knows your wounds but also knows your power. One who does not demand perfection but insists on truth. And the more you allow this inner reconciliation to take place, the less you feel the need to prove yourself in the outer world. You no longer crave constant validation or distraction. You no longer fear stillness. You begin to trust the quiet. You begin to value depth over speed, presence over performance, and truth over approval. And in that space where the shadow is no longer an enemy but a part of your wholeness, you discover a kind of peace that no amount of doing could ever offer. When the noise of constant doing fades and you allow yourself to pause, something ancient stirs within you, not something new, but something forgotten. Beneath the surface of daily routines and outward performances lives a self that has been waiting quietly, perhaps for years. This self is not measured by tasks completed or goals achieved. It is not defined by titles, roles, or productivity. It is not interested in appearances. It is concerned only with truth, with essence, with the inner life that has been overshadowed by the demands of the external world. To stop is to begin remembering. Not with the mind, but with the body, the heart, the deeper knowing that lives in the bones and breath. It is the return of something lost in the chase, the creativity that once came so naturally before it was monetized or judged, the joy that lived in simple moments before they were interrupted by urgency, the voice that used to speak without fear before it was silenced by expectation. This self has not disappeared. It has only gone quiet, waiting for you to slow down enough to hear it again. The modern pace leaves little room for this kind of return. Everything is designed to keep you moving, achieving, improving. Even rest is often turned into another task, something to optimize, measure, schedule. But the return to the forgotten self does not work on a schedule. It unfolds in its own time, in its own language, and it begins the moment you stop insisting on being busy. When you stop doing for long enough, you begin to feel things you didn't even know you had buried, longings you forgot you had, questions you never dared to ask, a sense that there is more to life than the pattern you've been repeating. There is a kind of grief that often arises here, a grief for all the time lost in distraction, for the parts of you that were silenced to make others comfortable, for the dreams that were dismissed as impractical, for the authenticity that was traded for acceptance. But within that grief is the seed of transformation, because once you allow yourself to feel what has been waiting inside, you begin to reclaim your agency. You begin to see that your worth was never meant to be earned through effort or proven through perfection. It was always there, beneath the layers, waiting to be recognized, and in that recognition, a quiet power returns, a sense of rootedness, a sense that you do not need to chase anything to be whole. The forgotten self does not crave validation. It craves expression. It does not seek approval. It seeks alignment. It does not want to impress the world. It wants to belong to itself. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. You start to make decisions not from fear or pressure, but from intuition and clarity. You begin to say no without guilt. You begin to say yes to what actually nourishes you. You no longer measure your days by how much you've accomplished, but by how deeply you've lived. Creativity reawakens here, not the kind that is forced or strategic, but the kind that flows naturally when you are in touch with who you truly are. You start to write, paint, sing, build, imagine, not because you must, but because it feels like breathing. Play returns, wonder returns, curiosity returns, and with them comes a lightness that had been missing for so long beneath the weight of all that doing. You remember how it felt to be connected to life rather than just managing it. This is not a luxury. This is not indulgence. This is reclamation, a return to the self that was never lost, only waiting. And once this self begins to emerge, you see that nothing external can replace it. No amount of success, no praise, no perfect performance can take the place of this inner homecoming, because in this place you are no longer trying to be anything. You are simply allowing yourself to be, and that at last is enough. When you stop living in the rhythm of constant doing, something begins to shift in your relationships, not just with others, but with yourself. You start to notice how much of your connection to people has been shaped by urgency, by obligation, by the invisible contracts of busyness. You've been showing up, yes, but often not truly there. There is a difference between physical presence and emotional availability, and the former can become a performance when the soul is absent. Slowing down strips away the roles we play and invites something much more difficult and more sacred. Genuine, in connection, you begin to realize how often you've been relating to others through the lens of control, trying to manage outcomes, trying to fix, to advise, to ensure everything stays within the boundaries of your expectations. Control can wear many disguises. It can look like love, responsibility, even care, but beneath it often lies fear. Fear of loss, fear of vulnerability, fear of being seen as imperfect or not enough. And when you're always doing, when your life is built around structure and efficiency, it becomes easy to convince yourself that you're simply being responsible, that you're keeping things in order. But the truth is, in that mode, you're not connecting. You're managing. When you stop, when you step out of the urgency, you begin to see how tightly you've been holding everything. How much pressure you've placed on yourself to be the one who keeps it all together. How much you've edited yourself in relationships to avoid conflict or disappointment. You begin to hear the subtle voice inside that has been longing not to fix others or impress them, but simply to be with them. To be real, to be soft, to be fully present. You realize that true connection is not born from effort, but from presence. In that stillness, your capacity to listen deepens. You begin to hear others in a new way, not just their words, but the spaces between them, the emotions they don't know how to say, the fears they mask with small talk or perfectionism. You stop rushing to respond, to give advice, to solve. You begin to hold space, to let silence stretch without needing to fill it, to let someone else be exactly where they are without trying to pull them forward or push them away. And in doing so, you offer something rare in this world, a safe place to be fully human. The same is true for your relationship with yourself. When you stop, the inner dialogue becomes clearer. You notice how often your self-talk has been harsh, demanding, rooted in performance rather than compassion. You start to hear the internal scripts that say you're only valuable if you're productive, only lovable if you're pleasing, only worthy if you're doing more than enough. And as you sit with these voices, not running from them but letting them speak, you begin to soften. You begin to answer them with something different, not another task, not another goal, but presence. You begin to parent the parts of you that have been striving so hard just to feel safe. This transformation touches every part of your life. Relationships that were built on roles or expectations begin to fall away or evolve. Some connections may dissolve, not out of resentment, but because they were held together by the glue of performance rather than the substance of truth. Other relationships deepen in ways you never imagined, because you are finally meeting people as you really are and allowing them to do the same. You stop editing yourself. You stop hiding your mess. You begin to trust that authenticity is not a risk but a necessity, and in this slower, more honest space, you rediscover intimacy, not just romantic or emotional intimacy, but the intimacy of shared silence, of unspoken understanding, of knowing and being known without defense. You no longer seek to control, you seek to connect. You no longer speak just to be heard, but to express something real. You stop trying to earn your place in the lives of others and start belonging to yourself, which is the only place true connection can begin. When the momentum of doing is finally interrupted, when the engine of productivity is turned down low enough to hear what lies beneath it, something begins to emerge that is quieter than ambition and deeper than routine. It is not the absence of activity that you find, but the presence of meaning, a kind of meaning that does not shout, does not demand, does not compete. A meaning that whispers, that waits, that is uncovered rather than constructed. It begins to show itself in the stillness, in the questions you stopped asking because you were too busy answering everyone else's expectations. And when you slow down enough to hear those questions again, something within you shifts. You begin to sense that much of what you were doing was not because it truly mattered, but because you were afraid of what might happen if you stopped. There is a difference between a full life and a meaningful one. A full life can be packed with events, obligations, and distractions, and still feel hollow at its center. A meaningful life, on the other hand, may look quieter, may move more slowly, but it pulses with something alive, something real. It is not defined by how much you do, but by how deeply you are connected to what you do and why. This depth cannot be accessed in a rush. It requires space, slowness, and honesty. It asks you to let go of the noise that tells you more is always better, faster is always smarter, visibility is always success. It asks you to look inward, to consider the possibility that the life you have built may be efficient, impressive, even celebrated, and yet still disconnected from your soul when you stop. Meaning starts to rise to the surface, not in dramatic revelations, but in small, steady recognitions. You notice the things that light you up in ways no external praise ever could. You rediscover the joy of simplicity, the richness of being fully engaged with one thing at a time. You realize that depth has always been more fulfilling than breadth, that one honest moment can be more significant than 1,000 empty accomplishments. You begin to feel how much of your striving was built on inherited definitions of success, definitions that may never have truly belonged to you. And when you set those definitions down, even briefly, you create space for something truer to emerge in this space. You remember what it feels like to live from the inside out instead of the outside in, to make choices based on alignment rather than obligation, to follow a sense of internal resonance instead of external approval, and as you do, you find that your energy becomes more focused, more intentional. You no longer feel pulled in 1,000 directions because you are no longer trying to be everything for everyone. You are simply trying to be yourself, and that, finally, becomes enough. You start to see that meaning is not something to chase, but something to listen for. It is revealed in quiet moments, in presence, in acts of attention. It often hides beneath the surface of ordinary life, in the conversation you didn't rush, in the breath you actually felt, in the decision you made not for recognition, but because it aligned with your values. It is not glamorous, and it is not loud, but it is honest, and that honesty begins to rewire you. You no longer need to prove your worth through overextension. You no longer need to outrun your discomfort. You no longer need to outsource your identity to titles or timelines. You begin to live in a way that honors what matters most, not what appears most important, and slowly, as meaning takes root, you realize that the life you truly long for is not found at the end of endless effort, but in the depth of deliberate presence. You begin to make peace with the pauses, with the not knowing, with the space between one thing and the next. You learn to trust that in doing less, you are not becoming less. You are becoming more of who you were meant to be all along. You have been doing too much, my friend. You are taught to move faster, to climb higher, to chase more. But in this very moment, something ancient calls you to descend, to slow, to stop. And when you do, when you surrender the illusion of endless striving, you do not become less. You become real. To stop is not to give up, it is to wake up. So stop, breathe, listen. The soul you abandoned while chasing the world has been waiting patiently for your return.